In the quiet heart of Silver Ridge Sanctuary, a remote mountain refuge in the wilds of Montana, where the wind whispers through pine needles and morning mist clings to every leaf, lived a creature unlike any other. Mira, a female bobcat, had once been found on the brink of death, starving, skeletal, and silent. But under the care of Grace Turner, a reclusive wildlife veterinarian who had long chosen the company of animals over people, Mira survived. She matured, softened, and became the quiet guardian of the forest. Then, one foggy morning, Grace discovered a cardboard box left at the sanctuary's front gate. Inside were 5 tiny kittens, wet, frail, their ribs visible, eyes still shut. Grace sighed. But even she didn't know. The soul who would save them this time wasn't her. It was Mira. And in the days that followed, the line between predator and protector would begin to blur along with the boundaries between what we fear and what truly saves us. The early Montana sky was painted a pale gray. Cold wind slid through the valley, carrying the scent of pine sap and the damp musk of forest moss. Grace Turner, eyes shadowed from a sleepless night, stepped out of her old pickup, a steaming coffee cup in hand. She halted suddenly. In front of the sanctuary gate, just beneath the wooden sign etched with Silver Ridge Wildlife Refuge, sat a rain-soaked cardboard box. "Not this morning," she muttered. Cautiously, Grace knelt and lifted the lid. A sharp, sour odor rose, the scent of abandonment. 5 tiny kittens lay huddled inside, matted fur clinging to their fragile bodies, breaths shallow. One was jet black, 2 gray, 2 with pale orange stripes. They trembled in waves, eyes swollen shut, noses crusted, their ribs clearly visible beneath their skin. Grace scooped up the box and rushed it inside. The clinic came alive in a rhythm she knew too well. Warming pads, 4 fluids, antibiotics, droplets of milk from a syringe. She no longer asked why. Out here, the limits of human kindness often stopped at the edge of the trees. Mira, the oldest bobcat at the refuge, had stood the moment she heard the box set down. She padded slowly to the fence line, head tilted, ears perked, amber eyes fixed on the building. Grace didn't notice. She was busy chasing each fragile breath back into the kitten's lungs. 3 days passed in a blur. The rescue station felt like a suspended dream. No real day or night, only shifts. The drone of heaters, kitten wheezes, and quiet, constant worry. One late night, as Grace slumped into a wooden chair, Jake, the longtime animal caretaker, gently tapped her shoulder. "You know Mira once raised 2 bear cubs, right?" he whispered. Grace lifted an eyebrow. "Back during wildfire season. We brought in some orphans, just temporary. But Mira," she licked them clean, "stood guard all night. They grew up thinking they were bears who climbed on a bobcat's back." Grace chuckled faintly, but when her eyes landed on the far corner of the room where the kittens lay beneath a heat lamp, she fell silent. Mira stood just outside the fence, gaze locked on the glowing window, not pacing, not growling, just still as if waiting. "Maybe," Jake said quietly, "she wants to be a mother again." Grace didn't reply. But that night, she took a clean cloth, gently wiped down each kitten, and placed them in a shallow tray. She brought it near the fence, where Mira still lingered. When the cloth touched the ground, Mira stepped forward. She lowered her head and sniffed. Then she made a soft sound, not a hunting call, not a warning, but a whisper, longing, familiar. And in that moment, Grace knew something had begun. Not according to plan, not in any handbook, but real, unmistakably real. Cold rain fell steadily for 3 days. In the back room of the rescue center, condensation clung to the window pane, reflecting the soft yellow glow of the overhead lamp. Grace slumped over the stainless steel table, ears tuned to the faint, ragged breathing of the kittens, now only 3 left. One black kitten had passed quietly in the night. Another, a gray one, though warmed and hydrated, still hadn't opened its eyes. Eli, the head manager of Silver Ridge, stepped in, his coat soaked through. He placed a steaming cup of coffee next to Grace. "Have you seen Mira?" he asked. his voice low. Grace nodded wearily. She's been standing there all morning, not eating, not pacing, just staring at the door. Eli was silent for a moment, then said something that made Grace lift her head abruptly. I think we should let her try. What did you say? She asked, narrowing her eyes. Let Mira interact with the kittens, Eli repeated calmly. She raised orphaned bears before. She once guarded a wild raccoon through an entire winter. If anyone here has the instinct strong enough to sense a life in need, it's Mira. No. Grace shook her head, her voice sharpening. They're too fragile. One rough lick, one reflexive pounce, that's all it takes. Eli didn't argue. Instead, he set down the coffee and pulled an old photo from his coat pocket, a snowy snapshot of Mira curled protectively around two sleeping bear cubs. Grace fell silent. She had long trusted animal instinct, but now she stood at the edge between intuition and danger. Her gaze shifted to the window, where Mira still stood, eyes fixed on the light inside. The next morning, after hours of debate and cautious planning, Grace agreed to try. But not in the clinic. In the semi-open enclosure with mesh dividers and surveillance cameras. They prepared a heated nest lined with dry cloths and chose the weakest kitten, the one with little hope left. Just once, Grace whispered. Any sign of aggression, we pull her out. The gate opened. Mira entered the enclosure. No rush, no hiss. Just slow steps, lowered head, a gentle sniff over the cloth. The kitten stirred, wheezing softly. Mira sat. Then, without hesitation, she lay down, bent her head, and began licking the kitten's head slow, instinctive strokes. From the control room, Grace clenched her fists, eyes glued to the screen. A paradox of a decision, but maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a quiet miracle. The first 3 days, all contact was strictly supervised. Grace's team placed an incubator next to Mira's enclosure, separated by a transparent glass wall. Each day, they brought in cloths infused with the kitten's scent for Mira to smell, and gently transferred Mira's scent onto the kitten's bedding. Mira never growled. She didn't back away. On the contrary, each time a cloth was offered, she approached, sniffed thoroughly, then sat facing the glass, eyes locked on the tiny silhouettes huddled inside. She's remembering something, Eli said softly, eyes fixed on the monitor. By the 4th day, they opened the semi-outdoor enclosure, allowing Mira to step closer to the kitten's area, though still behind a soft barrier. This time, Mira took the initiative. She didn't lunge, didn't act out. She simply walked forward, gave a soft growl nod of threat, but a gentle signal. I'm here. Grace carefully placed a kitten on a clean towel, nudging it slowly toward Mira. Mira sniffed, lifted her head, then bent down and gave a light lick to the fragile creature gasping on the cloth. In that instant, without a word spoken, tears filled Grace's eyes. She's accepted them, she whispered. That night, they moved all the kittens into the semi-open enclosure. Mira lay on her side, curling herself into a protective crescent, allowing the kittens to snuggle between her belly and forelegs. Though she had no milk, Mira pressed her body against theirs, as if trying to warm them with the heat of her own blood. She didn't sleep, only rested her eyes, emitting a low, rhythmic purring growl. The sound resonated like a soft heartbeat through the space. No one had ever heard Mira make that sound, not with the orphan bears, not with the raccoons. Only now, as she became a mother once more, did this instinctive, tender hum emerge a pulse of warmth in the silence of the wild. Grace sat quietly outside, not daring to interrupt. She looked up at the screen Mira, cradling a whole nest of kittens, like a mother rediscovering something she thought was lost. And for the first time in days, everyone at the rescue center truly smiled. Mira didn't just accept the kittens into her care, she raised them as if she'd done it 100 times before. Though she was a wild bobcat, once surviving winters curled up beside raccoons and sharing caves with orphan bears, she had never truly been a mother. And yet, to these kittens, she was more than a protector. She became their first guide to the world. In the mornings, when the sunlight slipped gently through the mesh curtain into the enclosure, Mira would rise and let out a low, steady growl. The kittens, still groggy, would clamber up one by one. Mira nudged each of them softly toward the pile of toys, cloth balls, faux fur strips, bits of twine Grace had prepared. As the kittens began to stalk, leap, and pounce, Mira stood beside them, observing. At times, she'd gently place a paw to calm an overly aggressive move, or nod approvingly when one executed a perfect ambush. Only Theo, the smallest and weakest of the group, lagged behind. One of his back legs had suffered frostbite, and his left eye barely opened. He'd often be left out when the others scrambled about, but Mira always returned. She would lick him gently, nudge him upright with her shoulder, then lie down so Theo could climb onto her belly and soak in her warmth. One afternoon, Sophia entered the room and froze in place. What she saw left her breathless. All the kittens were climbing Mira's back, pawing at her tail, nibbling her ears, even sliding down her sides as if playing their own version of a snow ride. And Mira? She lay there calmly, eyes half closed, tail flicking now and then as if smiling with her whole body. She knows exactly what she's doing, Sophia whispered to Grace, her eyes glistening. Yeah. Grace nodded, her voice catching. She's not just raising them. She's reminding us what being a mother really means. In this wordless bond between creatures of entirely different species, Mira built their first home, one without walls, without doors, but filled with warmth, care, and quiet, unconditional love. The first snow fell earlier than anyone expected. That morning, before the sun had even touched the distant ridgelines, a pickup truck rolled to a stop outside the refuge gates. The driver stepped out and lifted a large steel crate from the truck bed. Inside was a male bobcat. His gray-black coat matted with dried blood, one eye swollen shut from injury. His name was Ash. A trap near the lower valley, Eli explained quickly, helping Grace with the crate. Front leg caught, but no break. He'll need to be quarantined for a while. From behind her enclosure, Mira lifted her gaze. She didn't hiss, didn't growl, just stared long and still as if recognizing a kindred wild soul. From that day forward, Ash stayed in the treatment enclosure at the back of the facility. But what surprised Grace was how Mira responded. Every morning, after feeding the kittens, Mira would stroll over and sit outside Ash's pen. At first, the kittens hesitated, unsure, but soon they followed Mira's lead, tiptoeing toward the fence to peek in. On one quiet morning, Mira even nudged Bristle, the most mischievous kitten, right up to the wire. Ash didn't flinch. Instead, he pushed a piece of meat gently through the bars. That silent exchange repeated for a week. No one fully understood it, but everyone could feel it. Something was shifting. Ash stopped clawing at the bars. Mira stopped growling when Grace approached. The kittens no longer feared Ash, and Ash no longer feared the tiny beings that climbed over Mira's back. On the first true morning of snow, when a light dusting blanketed the earth, Sophia opened Mira's door to check the heating mat. Mira didn't rush out. Instead, she turned and let out a soft growl toward Ash's pen. Ash rose and stepped forward. Grace glanced at Eli, who simply gave her a quiet nod. They opened Ash's gate. Tension filled the air for a moment, and then Mira stepped forward. Ash followed. No growls, no posturing, just two bobcats, one tail lowered, one nuzzle exchanged, like a greeting, walking side by side into the home where kittens now played. Bristle was the first to approach Ash. Without hesitation, Ash lay down, extending his injured front leg so the tiny cat could climb atop his shoulder. That night, an unusual stillness settled over the entire refuge. Inside Mira's pen, 5 small bodies curled together into a soft, warm tangle beneath the amber heat lamp. Mira lay in the center, Ash beside her, and the kittens nestled between them both. Outside, Grace stood with her palm pressed to the wind-blocking board, exhaling slowly. "A family," she whispered. "A strange little family, but a real one." The first snow fell earlier than anyone expected. That morning, before the sun had even touched the distant ridge lines, a pickup truck rolled to a stop outside the refuge gates. The driver stepped out and lifted a large steel crate from the truck bed. Inside was a male bobcat. His gray-black coat matted with dried blood, one eye swollen shut from injury. His name was Ash. "A trap near the lower valley," Eli explained quickly, helping Grace with the crate. "Front leg caught, but no break. He'll need to be quarantined for a while." From behind her enclosure, Mira lifted her gaze. She didn't hiss, didn't growl, just stared long and still as if recognizing a kindred wild soul. From that day forward, Ash stayed in the treatment enclosure at the back of the facility. But what surprised Grace was how Mira responded. Every morning, after feeding the kittens, Mira would stroll over and sit outside Ash's pen. At first, the kittens hesitated, unsure, but soon they followed Mira's lead, tiptoeing toward the fence to peek in. On one quiet morning, Mira even nudged Bristle, the most mischievous kitten, right up to the wire. Ash didn't flinch. Instead, he pushed a piece of meat gently through the bars. That silent exchange repeated for a week. No one fully understood it, but everyone could feel it. Something was shifting. Ash stopped clawing at the bars. Mira stopped growling when Grace approached. The kittens no longer feared Ash, and Ash no longer feared the tiny beings that climbed over Mira's back. On the first true morning of snow, when a light dusting blanketed the earth, Sophia opened Mira's door to check the heating mat. Mira didn't rush out. Instead, she turned and let out a soft growl toward Ash's pen. Ash rose and stepped forward. Grace glanced at Eli, who simply gave her a quiet nod. They opened Ash's gate. Tension filled the air for a moment, and then Mira stepped forward. Ash followed. No growls, no posturing. Just 2 bobcats, one tail lowered, one nuzzle exchanged, like a greeting, walking side by side into the home where kittens now played. Bristle was the first to approach Ash. Without hesitation, Ash lay down, extending his injured front leg so the tiny cat could climb atop his shoulder. That night, an unusual stillness settled over the entire refuge. Inside Mira's pen, 5 small bodies curled together into a soft, warm tangle beneath the amber heat lamp. Mira lay in the center, Ash beside her, and the kittens nestled between them both. Outside, Grace stood with her palm pressed to the wind-blocking board, exhaling slowly. "A family," she whispered. "A strange little family, but a real one." A year passed, like the blink of an eye in the deep forest. Snow once again blanketed the roof of the sanctuary. The wooden steps were slick and cold, and the bare trees cast long shadows across the peaceful dirt yard. Mira was now a mother, a true mother. She and Ash had brought 3 bobcat kittens into the world, 2 males and 1 female, with soft gray-striped coats and amber eyes that gleamed like tiny fires in the snow. They were named Flint, Echo, and Fern, names drawn from the forest, just like the place that once raised Mira. Ash had changed too. Once wary and solitary, the male bobcat now spent every morning sunbathing with his cubs, gently batting at them with his forepaws, and patiently standing guard as Mira learned to nurse and comfort her young. They were an unusual family, unusual in how gentleness had become part of their rhythm, flowing like warmth from a winter hearth. Then one day, as if fate had written its own echo, a cardboard box appeared at the gate once more. Inside were 2 kittens, even smaller than the ones from the past. Their eyes weren't open yet. They didn't cry. They barely moved, save for their tiny, quivering breaths and the faint scent of fading milk. Grace cradled the box in her arms, staring across the fence where Mira lay with her cubs. She didn't speak, just sighed. But before she could utter a word, Mira stood up. She left her 3 little ones in Ash's care and approached the fence, her eyes fixed on the box. She let out a soft, almost inaudible growl. "She knows," Sophia whispered. And so, from that day forward, Grace placed the 2 kittens in a special basket by Mira's enclosure each morning. At first, it was only for a short time, then half the day, then all afternoon. But the most astonishing thing, Mira wasn't the only one who cared for them. Flint, Echo, and Fern, not yet a year old, began inching closer. They didn't bite. They didn't pounce too roughly. They learned to extend their paws gently, to swat carefully at tiny tails, even lying down so the kittens could crawl onto their backs. One afternoon, Sophia witnessed Fern, the quickest and most daring of the 3, grooming one of the tiny kittens, before lying still to let it fall asleep on her belly. Sophia burst into tears. "This isn't just instinct," Grace murmured, placing a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "Mira passed on something deeper than blood." That was the day the sanctuary began calling her the mother 3 times. Once for the abandoned kittens, once for her own cubs, and once for the little lives that came after. Her legacy wasn't just species. Mira had passed down something else, a way of loving beyond instinct, a way of seeing others with a tenderness nature never taught, but heart somehow always knew. Late winter, snow lay thin like a white shawl across the ground. In the open yard behind the sanctuary, Mira played with her 3 bobcat cubs. They pounced, chased, and tumbled, leaving soft, swirling marks in the snow. Ash rested nearby, half dozing, half watchful. His ears still twitched at unfamiliar sounds, but the way he let the cubs climb all over him without a single growl, that was something no staff member had ever expected from a full-grown male bobcat. Beyond the fence, 2 once-abandoned kittens, now strong, agile, and playful, darted around the old toys Grace had left for them. No longer timid or afraid, they radiated pure curiosity. And always, their eyes drifted toward the other side, where Mira would occasionally press her nose to the bars and let out that familiar low growl. Grace stood on the porch, cradling a cup of hot tea in both hands. Her eyes followed the little one's movements, then settled on Mira, whose presence now exuded a strange peace. Mira was no longer the rescued, the survivor of snowstorms and starvation. She was something more complete, a mother, a teacher, a pillar of this place. There was something in Mira that no human could have taught. Her patience with the kittens, her quiet strength in letting them go, her willingness to trust Ash, and now, the way she continued to live, to love, as if her heart recognized no species, no boundaries. Sophia once wrote in her report, "Mira behaves as if she knows she's doing something unprecedented." But today, Grace believed it wasn't just knowing. Mira had chosen this path. She chose to live beyond survival. Snow began to fall, glittering beneath the fading winter sun. One bobcat cub tackled Ash's tail. On the other side of the fence, a kitten leapt and batted at the bars, then nestled close to the spot where Mira was sitting. And Mira, as always, lowered her head, touched noses through the gap, a short breath shared that somehow held enough warmth for an entire winter. Grace whispered, not knowing if anyone would hear, "Silver Ridge is more than a sanctuary. It's a home for what once seemed impossible. And Mira, the little bobcat, has become the heart of it all."